It started with a strange pain in her leg, a small bump, a little heat, nothing serious, until it moved. When Clara Hastings walked into the emergency room, no one expected what happened next. The scan showed something alive squirming beneath her skin. Within minutes, the doctor turned pale and called security. What they extracted wasn't just a parasite. It was carrying a microchip, a device, and it had been growing inside her for weeks. Clara, a devoted mother of two, had unknowingly become the host in a covert biological experiment. She wasn't just sick. She had been chosen, targeted, used. You weren't a patient, he told her. You were a trial. This isn't fiction. This is what really happened. If you're ready for a story that will shake your trust in everything you thought was safe, subscribe now and stay with us to the very end. Clara Hastings had always known what it meant to endure. From the outside, her life in the quiet town of Andover, Massachusetts, might have seemed unremarkable. Just another single mother doing her best to raise two children. But within the modest walls of her weathered gray home on Ashbury Lane, Clara lived a life of tireless devotion, shaped by sacrifice, molded by grief, and guided by an unshakable love for her children. The house was small, with creaking floors that told stories of years gone by and faded curtains that still held traces of laughter and lullabies. It had once been full of light, when her husband James was alive, before the accident that changed everything. Since then, Clara had filled every corner with resilience. There was no room for indulgence or complaint, only forward motion. Every morning began the same. Before the sun kissed the sky, Clara was already up, pouring cereal for Sue, her wide-eyed 10-year-old with a wild imagination and an unquenchable thirst for stories. Next came Howard, barely 8, gentle and introspective, always observing the world with the quiet wisdom of someone far older than his years. Clara would kiss their foreheads, tie their shoes, and remind them, like a daily prayer, that they were loved more than anything in this world. After breakfast, she dropped them at school and head to her job at the local medical clinic, where she worked long shifts as a patient coordinator. It wasn't glamorous, but she was good at it. Organized, reliable, invisible, in the way hardworking people often are. She scheduled appointments, consoled worried parents, calmed anxious patients, and when her shift ended, she returned home to a second job: laundry, dishes, homework help, bedtime stories. Clara never complained. Not once. Her joy came not from grand gestures, but from tiny, fleeting moments. The way Sue would light up while talking about a new book, or how Howard would gently rest his head on her shoulder while she read aloud to them. These were the reasons she pushed through the exhaustion, through the loneliness that sometimes crept in during the quiet hours after the kids had fallen asleep. But even the strongest pillars begin to crack under relentless weight, and Clara, for all her strength, had begun to feel the strain. Her back ached in the mornings. Her legs felt heavy by nightfall. She'd begun to forget things. Small things at first, like where she placed her keys or whether she'd switched off the stove. Her coworkers noticed her growing quietness, the dark circles under her eyes. Her friends gently urged her to take a break, to rest, to breathe. But Clara always gave the same answer: I don't have time. The truth was, she didn't know how to stop. To rest meant letting someone else carry the load. To rest meant risk, vulnerability. And Clara had long ago learned that when you depend on others, you open yourself to pain. That changed on her 41st birthday, when her closest friends surprised her with something she hadn't dared to dream of: a plane ticket. Not just one destination, but a carefully planned 3-week itinerary through Japan, Thailand, and Hawaii, a journey meant to restore, to renew, to remind her that she too was allowed to live. At first, she refused. Absolutely not. Who would watch the kids? What if something happened? But her friends had already thought it through. Mrs. Halverson, her 74-year-old neighbor, had agreed to stay with Sue and Howard. The children, surprisingly, were enthusiastic. Sue had even squealed, "You deserve this, Mom." Still, Clara hesitated. The guilt gnawed at her. How could she think of leaving, even for a short while? What kind of mother takes a vacation when there's laundry to do, bills to pay, backpacks to pack? But that night, as she sat on the edge of her bed, rubbing her sore feet, she stared at the unused suitcase in her closet and made a decision that felt both foreign and terrifying. She would go. She told herself it was just 3 weeks, a pause, a chance to see the world beyond her small bubble, to find something, anything, that reminded her of who she used to be before the weight of motherhood and grief dulled her edges. She didn't know it then, but the trip would change her life, not in the way she imagined, not with adventure or laughter or breathtaking landscapes, but with something darker, something she couldn't have predicted, something waiting for her, unseen and silent just beneath the surface. In the days leading up to her departure, Clara moved through a routine with an odd sense of detachment. Everything felt both urgent and far away. She labeled drawers, organized snacks into Ziploc bags, left sticky notes on the fridge for Mrs. Halverson. She printed out emergency contact lists, created a color-coded medication schedule for Howard's seasonal allergies, and recorded bedtime stories on her phone, just in case the kids missed her voice. Sue helped her pack. Her small hands folded shirts and tucked travel-size shampoos into a worn toiletry bag. "Will you ride a bullet train in Japan?" she asked, eyes wide with excitement. "Take pictures of vending machines and the cherry blossoms." Howard was more reserved, as always. He didn't say much, but the night before she left, he climbed into her bed and whispered, "Don't forget to come back." Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the pull between two worlds, one rooted in routine and safety, the other full of unknowns. Part of her hoped for a last-minute excuse to cancel, a fever, a snowstorm, anything. But morning came clear and crisp, the sky pale blue. The kids hugged her hard at the airport. Mrs. Halverson gave a firm nod, her voice steady. "It'll be fine. You go find your breath again." As the plane lifted off the tarmac, Clara pressed her forehead against the window. Below her, the patchwork of New England shrank until it was nothing more than fields and threads of road. For the first time in over a decade, she was truly alone. The first few days in Kyoto were a balm. The city was quiet in the early mornings, the narrow alleys damp with mist, lined with wooden homes and the scent of green tea. She wandered the philosopher's path, let the silence seep into her bones. In a small temple courtyard, she tied a wish on a prayer tree, her handwriting shaky. "May I return home whole and still myself." She smiled more easily, walked lighter. The constant tension in her neck began to loosen. By the time she arrived in Bangkok, her pace had quickened. The air was heavier, rich with spices and gasoline. She tasted street food that burned her tongue and made her laugh, bargained in markets that buzzed with chaotic energy. It was there, in the shaded courtyard of a hostel cafe, that she met Daniel. He introduced himself over iced coffee, an American in his late 30s with sun-worn skin and a quiet confidence. "You look like you're trying to figure out if the mango is worth the risk," he joked, nodding at the fruit on her plate. Clara smiled politely, instinctively guarded. But he had a way of talking that was easy to listen to. Measured, curious, just enough charm to soften her edges. They ran into each other again later that day near the Grand Palace. Then again in the floating market the next morning. By the third encounter, it no longer felt accidental. He offered to show her his favorite night market, said he'd been traveling Southeast Asia for years. Clara hesitated, but eventually agreed. It had been a long time since someone had looked at her like she wasn't invisible. That evening, they walked through rows of neon-lit stalls, sampling spicy noodles and jackfruit smoothies. Daniel spoke about his love for insects. Strange, yes, but he made it sound almost poetic. Something about the resilience of nature, the intelligence of adaptation. Clara listened, intrigued, but also uneasy. There was a strange intensity in the way he watched her sometimes, like he was studying something rare. She brushed it off as a trick of the moment, the humid air, the crowd, the glow of foreign lights. Later that night, when he handed her a fresh fruit smoothie, she thanked him but barely drank it. The flavor was strong, unfamiliar, and her stomach felt unsettled afterward. Jet lag, she figured. Or the heat. In the morning, Daniel was gone. No message, no trace. Clara didn't think much of it. She moved on to Hawaii, where she walked barefoot along golden beaches and let the ocean wind tangle her hair. She bought seashell earrings for Sue, a woven bracelet for Howard. She felt more present in those days than she had in years. But there were moments, just flashes, when she'd catch her reflection and feel like a stranger was staring back, as if something inside her had shifted ever so slightly. A heaviness in her right leg, dull and persistent, nothing serious, probably from all the walking. On the flight home, she sat quietly with a book open in her lap, but unread. Her thoughts drifted to her children, to the rhythm of home she would soon return to. She smiled at the idea of bedtime stories, backpacks, toast in the mornings. She didn't know then that something else had returned with her, something that had no intention of staying silent for long. The days that followed Clara's arrival home were quiet in all the right ways. The hum of the dishwasher in the evening, the sound of Sue flipping pages in her book, Howard humming while he organized his Lego bricks, these were the rhythms Clara had missed. They welcomed her back as though nothing had changed, and for a while it almost felt like nothing had. She brought with her a small suitcase packed with souvenirs and photographs, fragments of a world her children had never seen but now listened to with fascination. Sue clung to every detail: how vending machines in Japan sold warm drinks, how the monks in Thailand wrapped orange robes around their shoulders like golden rivers. Howard wanted to know about the animals. Were there monkeys? Did she see snakes? Clara told them everything, or almost everything. She didn't mention Daniel. She didn't know why. There had been nothing inappropriate, nothing she felt ashamed of. But something about him, or maybe about the way their encounters lingered in her thoughts, made her reluctant to explain. Back at work, the clinic was a carousel of returning patients and familiar complaints. Seasonal allergies, joint pain, checkups. Clara slipped easily into the rhythm again. But she noticed with quiet dismay that the fatigue she thought she'd shaken during her trip had returned. Her legs felt heavy. Her lower back ached. She blamed the flight, over 30 hours from Hawaii to Boston with layovers, cramped seating, and questionable airplane meals. But after a few more days, she realized it wasn't just fatigue. There was a particular discomfort in her right calf, a low buzz of sensation, like static electricity trapped beneath the skin. Sometimes it itched, sometimes it throbbed, and once, just for a second, she could have sworn she felt something twitch. She dismissed it, probably a pinched nerve, maybe a bug bite reacting strangely. Thailand had been humid, the jungle air thick with insects. Her body was adjusting. Nothing serious. Still, on the sixth night back, she sat on the edge of her bed and rolled up her pajama pant leg to look. There it was, a small raised bump, round, red, slightly swollen. The area was warm to the touch, not enough to panic over, but enough to keep her awake that night, her fingers unconsciously grazing the spot beneath the covers. In the morning, the bump hadn't changed, but Clara had. A thin thread of unease began to pull at her thoughts. At the clinic, she casually asked a nurse to take a look. The nurse shrugged. Could be a spider bite. Keep an eye on it. If it gets worse, maybe get it swabbed. So Clara kept an eye on it, and it did get worse. By the end of the week, the bump had grown. The skin over it stretched taut, tinged slightly purple at the edges. The sensation of pressure increased. It no longer felt like a sting or a bite. It felt like presence, something under her skin. Not painful exactly, but persistent, sentient, watching. At night, she found herself dreaming of movement, not running or flying, but something shifting just beneath the surface of her body, crawling, wriggling. She would wake drenched in sweat, gasping, reaching instinctively for her leg. The children noticed her restlessness. "Are you okay, Mom?" Sue asked one morning, holding her mother's hand at the breakfast table. "Just tired," Clara replied, managing a weak smile. "Jet lag takes longer to wear off when you're old like me." Howard didn't laugh. He looked at her leg, then at her face. His eyes narrowed just a little. It was a Saturday afternoon when the pain first turned sharp. She had taken the kids to the library, then stopped by the grocery store. As she stepped into her driveway carrying 2 bags of apples and yogurt, something in her leg seized, like a muscle cramp, but deeper, hotter. She dropped one bag, gritting her teeth against the sudden jolt. By the time she got inside and sat down, her calf was radiating heat. The bump had risen visibly now, forming a distinct mound like a blister trying to break free. She touched it, then immediately recoiled. Something had moved, not her muscle, not a nerve, something else. That night, while the kids watched a movie, Clara searched her symptoms online. She skimmed through results: abscess, cyst, blood clot. Then one forum post made her pause. A traveler had returned from Belize with a strange lesion on his shoulder. The doctors found a larva growing inside, a human botfly. Clara frowned and clicked away. Thailand wasn't even in that hemisphere, and this wasn't the rainforest. Still, the image stayed with her, so did the word. Botfly. She didn't mention the bump again, not to her coworkers, not to Mrs. Halverson, not even to the kids. Somehow saying it aloud would give it power, would make it real. Instead, Clara kept watching, observing, enduring, like she always had. But the dreams became more vivid. She was back in Thailand, wandering through the night market. The colors too bright, the sounds too sharp. Daniel was there, always just ahead of her, never turning around. He held a glass in his hand, a smoothie. He offered it to her again, and this time she drank it. The sweetness curdled in her mouth. Then came the crawling sensation, not in her leg but everywhere. Under her skin, inside her skull, in her breath. She tried to scream, but her voice wouldn't come. Only silence. Wet, suffocating silence. Clara would wake in the darkness, heart pounding, the sheets tangled around her legs. Her calf throbbed. She turned on the light and checked it again and again. The bump was growing, not rapidly, but steadily. The skin now puckered slightly at the center, the way skin does when something beneath it is pushing outward. One morning, while getting dressed, she noticed a faint trail of redness radiating from the bump, like the lines of a spreading infection. She pressed the area gently and felt something twitch. Not a reflex, not a spasm. Something else. She dropped onto the edge of the bed and buried her face in her hands. This wasn't a spider bite. This wasn't jet lag. Something was inside her. It took everything in her not to panic in front of the kids. She moved slower now, favoring her right leg without realizing it. She stopped going for walks, stopped taking the stairs. When Howard asked if they could ride bikes to the park, she said no without explanation. He didn't press, but he watched her. More than once, Clara caught him glancing at her leg when he thought she wasn't looking. That evening, she found herself alone in the bathroom, standing in front of the mirror. She turned to get a better look at her calf, trying to catch the angle just right under the overhead light. The skin was stretched tight, shiny, inflamed. It looked alien on her body, like it didn't belong to her anymore. Then, it moved. Not a ripple, not a shiver, a shift. As if something underneath had turned, rolled over. She staggered back, hand flying to the sink for balance. Her mouth was dry, her stomach clenched. The movement had been deliberate, measured. Not the erratic twitch of damaged tissue, but the calculated repositioning of a living thing. She knew, in that moment with chilling certainty, that she couldn't ignore it any longer. The next morning, Clara called the clinic and requested an appointment for herself. She left the kids with Mrs. Halverson and drove to the office in silence, her mind reeling with worst-case scenarios. Parasite, tumor, hallucination, something left behind by that drink, or by the humid, insect-laden air of the Bangkok alleys. She was met by Dr. Jacobs, a younger physician she'd worked with on scheduling for years. He raised an eyebrow when she limped into the exam room. "All right, Clara, let's see what we're dealing with," he said gently. She rolled up her pant leg, revealing the angry mound, the redness, the strange tightness. Dr. Jacobs examined it closely, then tapped on the skin with gloved fingers. Clara flinched. He didn't say anything at first, which only made the silence louder. "Have you had any recent insect bites?" he asked finally. "Yes. While I was traveling, Thailand." He nodded slowly. "It might be an abscess, could also be a severe reaction to something local. Mosquito, spider, even sand fleas. Let's run some labs and get an ultrasound, just to be safe," she agreed. Of course she did. Anything to name it, to understand it, to get it out. Later that day, she sat in a darkened room, while a technician guided a probe over her leg. The monitor flickered in grainy black and white. Clara couldn't read it, but the technician frowned slightly and adjusted the settings. "There's some motion artifact here," the technician mumbled. "Might be inflammation. We'll send it to radiology for a closer look." Clara nodded, heart thudding. She wanted to ask what motion artifact meant, but she already had a feeling she wouldn't like the answer. When she left the clinic, the sun had set. The streetlights flickered on as she limped to her car, her mind unraveling thread by thread. The word from the form returned, like a whisper behind her ear, "Botfly." She wanted to dismiss it, wanted to call it ridiculous, but she couldn't, not anymore. Something was inside her, and it wasn't going away. The next morning, Clara woke with a fever. It wasn't severe, not the kind that left her drenched in sweat or shivering beneath the blankets, but it was there, a low-grade heat humming beneath her skin, enough to make her scalp tingle and her breath feel heavier. Her body ached in a different way now, deeper, as if her bones were resisting movement. The area around the bump had changed again. The skin was darker, almost bruised, with a faint purple halo stretching outward like ink in water. She could see tiny blood vessels that hadn't been there before, spidering out from the swollen center. It no longer looked like a bite. It looked like an invasion. Clara didn't go to work that day. She told the clinic she needed time to rest. They were understanding. She never called out. But the truth was she couldn't stand for long without feeling dizzy. Her appetite vanished. Even her morning coffee tasted bitter, wrong. She tried to distract herself, folding laundry, sorting the mail, wiping already clean counters. But the sensation in her leg kept breaking through. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It was pressure. Movement, awareness, like something was alive in her body and had begun to assert itself. She took her temperature again, 100.3, then 100.8. The fever was rising. So was her fear. By the afternoon, Clara could no longer pretend this was normal. The motion artifact, the technician's furrowed brow, the twitch she'd felt, none of it could be explained away. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but her instincts, those deeply honed maternal instincts that had kept her children safe for years, were screaming now. Something was inside her, something growing. She returned to the forums she'd dismissed before, rereading the post about the man in Belize. The photos were still there, close-up shots of a larva emerging from a shoulder wound, its white body glistening with moisture. The comments below were filled with horror and disbelief. But what struck her most wasn't the images, it was the timeline. He hadn't known for weeks. He thought it was just a swollen mosquito bite. Until one morning, it started to breathe. Clara felt a cold sweat bloom across her back. She spent the rest of the afternoon on the couch, leg elevated, an ice pack wrapped in a dish towel pressed against the swelling. It helped a little, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw it, that photo, that thing. It wasn't just repulsive, it was violating. The thought that something had used his body as shelter, had fed on his blood, had grown in his flesh. It was more than disgusting. It was personal. She looked at her own leg, at the mound beneath the skin, and felt a wave of nausea so intense she had to clutch the armrest to steady herself. Her body had been her own for so long. A temple of sacrifice and strength. It had carried 2 children. It had worked 12-hour shifts. It had survived heartbreak. Now it was a host. When the kids came home from school, Claire forced herself upright. She smiled, hugged them, asked about their day. She moved slowly, favoring her left side, trying not to wince when the burning returned. She didn't want them to worry. They were too young to understand, too young to carry this. But Howard noticed. He didn't say anything, not directly. He just watched her closely. He lingered after dinner, asking if she needed help cleaning up, if she was feeling okay. Clara assured him she was fine. But she wasn't. That night, after she tucked them in, Clara sat alone on the bathroom floor, her back against the cold tile wall. The light above her buzzed faintly. She pulled up her pant leg and stared again at the wound. The center had changed. There was a tiny hole now, a pinprick, almost invisible, but she saw it, and she knew what it meant. The skin wasn't keeping something out. It was letting something breathe. She gagged, barely making it to the toilet in time. Her stomach lurched, empty, her body rebelling against itself. She clutched the porcelain, shivering, not from fever this time, but from the violation. The helplessness, the dread. Afterward, she sat on the floor again, knees pulled to her chest, sweat drying on her temples. Tomorrow, she would go to the emergency room, not for answers, for removal. Whatever was inside her, whatever had taken root in her flesh, it had to come out. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and coffee, clean, efficient, uncaring. Clara sat beneath fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly above her, the plastic chair cold against her legs. She had signed in 30 minutes ago, filled out the forms with trembling fingers, and now waited, alone, the ticking of the wall clock unnaturally loud in her ears. Her right leg throbbed beneath the fabric of her jeans. The bump pulsed now, with a rhythm disturbingly close to a heartbeat. She dared not touch it. She didn't want to feel the squirming again, didn't want to confirm what her body already knew. Around her, other patients sat slumped in chairs, coughing children, a teenager with a twisted ankle, an older man staring at the floor. Clara felt separate from all of them, like something else entirely, a host, not a patient, a vessel. When her name was finally called, she followed a nurse through a hallway lined with pale blue walls. They placed her in an exam room, took her vitals, temperature still elevated, blood pressure slightly high, and asked her to describe her symptoms. She spoke quietly, her voice steady even as her stomach turned. It started as a bite, maybe from a mosquito. I was in Thailand a few weeks ago. Since then, the spot on my leg has grown. It's swollen, hot to the touch. There's a small opening now, and I can feel something inside it, moving. The nurse's pen slowed. Moving, she echoed. Clara nodded. Like muscle twitching? No, Clara said. Like a thing. Alive. The nurse didn't speak for a second, then offered a tight smile and excused herself. Clara sat in silence, her hands clasped together to stop their trembling. She knew how it sounded, knew the kind of patient she might appear to be. But she also knew her own body. And what was happening inside it wasn't imaginary. A doctor arrived a few minutes later, younger than she expected, his expression kind but guarded. He listened carefully, asked a series of questions, travel history, medications, allergies. Then he examined her leg. He gently prodded the area around the bump, his gloved fingers careful and slow. Clara winced when he touched the center. He didn't speak immediately. We're going to do a scan, he said, just to see what's going on under the surface. Then we'll go from there. She nodded, grateful, relieved, even someone was taking her seriously. The imaging suite was dimly lit, quiet except for the whirring of machines. Clara lay still while the technician moved the transducer over her leg, her eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles above. The room was silent for a long time, too long. Then came the words she'd been dreading. There's something there, the technician whispered, not to her, but loud enough that she heard. Clara sat up too fast, dizzy from the motion. The screen showed a grainy black and white image, her calf, and something inside it, something long, curved, with tiny rhythmic movements. It was alive. She clutched the edge of the table as nausea surged again. The technician didn't meet her eyes. He simply called for the doctor. Back in the exam room, the doctor confirmed it. There appears to be a larva beneath the skin, likely a myiasis infection. We see them from time to time in tropical regions, though it's rare, especially this species. Not common in Southeast Asia. Clara couldn't speak. Her throat felt tight, like her body had closed off all other systems to keep from breaking apart. He continued gently. We'll admit you overnight for observation. Start some labs. We'll extract it under sterile conditions. You'll be okay. We've caught it early. Early? It didn't feel early. It felt like she had crossed some invisible line between health and horror, between safety and violation. Her own body had betrayed her. She signed the forms without reading them, let them insert an IV into her arm, changed into a hospital gown that felt 2 sizes too big, and settled into the narrow bed by the window. The room smelled of bleach and latex. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Her fever rose slightly. Her leg ached like a bruise stretched too thin. And beneath it, the sensation of movement became stronger, more purposeful, more insistent. She pressed the call button once, just to have someone's voice in the room. The nurse came, adjusted her blankets, smiled, then left. She was alone again, and that was when it happened. A sharp, tearing pain split through her calf. She gasped, pulling her leg back instinctively. The sheets stuck to her skin, wet. She pushed them away with shaking hands. From the center of the swollen bump, something was emerging. White, glossy, alive. It pushed through the small hole like it had been waiting, slowly, methodically. A thick-bodied larva glistening in the sterile hospital light. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Her scream didn't even have time to rise before the door burst open. Nurses rushed in. A doctor followed, barking orders. But Clara couldn't look away. There it was. The thing that had been inside her. Clara had seen many things in her years at the clinic. Blood, bone, grief. But nothing, not a single memory from her professional life, could have prepared her for the sight of the larva emerging from her leg. It was the kind of image that scorched itself into the mind, one that couldn't be unseen, roughly the length of her pinky finger, bulbous and wet. The creature pushed itself through the open wound with a squirming, deliberate force. Its pale, translucent body shimmered in the light, covered in tiny bristles and ridges. Clara could see it flexing, shifting, moving with a strange intelligence, as if aware of its environment, of her. For a few suspended seconds, no one moved. The nurses stood frozen, caught between duty and disbelief. The doctor recovered first. With a sharp command, he directed the team to prep for extraction. Clara couldn't hear the words. She only heard her breath. Fast, ragged, shallow. Her body had gone numb except for the searing heat in her calf. Then came the instruments, sterile forceps, gauze, a tray to receive the thing. The doctor worked swiftly but carefully, gripping the larva at its middle and guiding it out inch by glistening inch. Clara turned her head away, but she could still feel it, the sensation of removal, like something unknitting from the core of her. When it was finally out, the doctor placed the larva into a sealed specimen jar. The nurses wrapped her leg, applied antiseptic, and moved in practiced rhythm, as though trying to drown their discomfort in routine. Only when it was over did Clara begin to cry, not loud sobs, but quiet, silent tears that slid down her cheeks and disappeared into the pillow. Her body trembled uncontrollably. It wasn't just the pain, it was the realization. This thing, this grotesque foreign invader, had been growing inside her, eating, breathing, alive. The larva was sent to the hospital's pathology lab immediately. Clara was given fluids, painkillers, and something to help her sleep, though sleep didn't come. Even with the thing gone, her legs still pulsed with the memory of it. She could still feel the shape, the pressure, the slow, calculated movements under her skin. Her brain couldn't separate truth from trauma yet. Her body didn't know the difference. The next morning, a new physician entered her room, an infectious disease specialist named Dr. Ellen Reyes. She was calm, older, her voice like stone smoothed by water. She pulled up a chair and opened a file. "We confirmed the identification," she said. "Dermatobia hominis, human botfly." Clara had already known the name, but hearing it spoken aloud officially was something else. "Dr. Reyes continued, "It's extremely rare to see these outside of Central or South America. They don't exist in Thailand, or Japan, or Hawaii. That makes your case unique." Clara blinked, her voice low and hoarse. "Then how did it get in me?" The doctor hesitated. "That's what we're trying to figure out." She explained the life cycle of the botfly, how it lays its eggs on a vector insect, usually a mosquito, how the warmth of a human host causes the eggs to hatch, how the larvae burrow under the skin, feeding and growing for weeks before emerging to pupate in soil. It was science. Clinical. Factual. But to Clara, it felt like violation dressed up in biology. She asked if there could be more. Dr. Reyes didn't answer right away. "We did another scan overnight. There's some abnormal soft tissue activity around the site. It could be residual inflammation, or it could be additional larvae." Clara felt her stomach drop. "Is that possible?" she asked. Dr. Reyes met her gaze. "It's not common, but yes, especially if the vector carried multiple eggs. We'd like to keep you here for further observation. If there are more, we'll remove them. I promise, we won't let you go home until it's safe." The word echoed in Clara's mind, unfamiliar now. What did it even mean anymore? She had flown across the world, seeking renewal. Instead, she returned with something that didn't belong, something no one could explain, something that shouldn't have been possible. Dr. Reyes gave her a moment to process, then left with a soft, "We'll check in shortly." Alone again, Clara stared at the ceiling. Her thoughts weren't sharp anymore. They blurred together, a slow unraveling. How many more? How deep? Could they migrate? What if they reached her spine, her brain? The thought made her chest tighten. Her body, once a source of strength and purpose, now felt like foreign terrain. She no longer trusted it. Every twitch, every ache, felt suspect. She found herself pressing her fingers to other parts of her body, her thigh, her abdomen, searching for signs, waiting for motion, for betrayal. She didn't know yet that the true horror had only just begun. The second scan told a different story. Clara sat upright in the hospital bed as Dr. Reyes returned with a new set of images, printed and clipped to a thin manila folder. There was a seriousness in the doctor's step now, less composed, more urgent. Her expression was measured, but something behind her eyes had shifted. Clara noticed it immediately. Dr. Reyes sat beside her and laid out the scans on a small metal tray table. "There's something you need to see." Clara leaned forward, heart thudding. The images looked similar to the first scan, cross-sections of her leg in dull gray tones. But in the latest ones, just above and behind the original extraction site, there was something else. It wasn't as defined as the first larva had been, more shadow than structure. But it was there, or rather they were. There are two more, Reyes said softly, smaller, likely in earlier stages of development, and one of them, it's moving. Clara inhaled sharply, her stomach nodding. How soon? She whispered. Soon. But that's not the only concern. Reyes hesitated, then reached into the folder and pulled out a printed report from pathology. She held it in her hands for a moment, as if weighing its contents before allowing them to land. The lab found something unusual in the extracted larva. Clara didn't speak. There was a structure embedded near the posterior end of its body. Foreign material. At first we thought it was debris, maybe something had absorbed through your tissue. But it was too symmetrical, too precise. She unfolded the final image. An enhanced microscopic scan of the larva's rear segment. Clara stared. There, nestled between the muscle fibers of the creature's body, was a shape that had no place in biology. Tiny, metallic, hexagonal. It looked artificial. It's not organic, Reyes said. It's a microdevice, possibly a sensor. We've never seen anything like it inside a parasite. Clara's mind went blank, then flooded. That was in me, she said, voice barely audible. That thing. Yes, Reyes said. It was, and it may still be part of the remaining larvae. The room seemed to shift around Clara then, like the floor had tilted ever so slightly, not from fear, not just from disgust, but from something colder. Design. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a wild insect gone rogue. Someone had placed that micro-device inside the larva, someone had introduced it to her body, and now there were more. We're contacting CDC, Reyes continued. We'll escalate to public health officials once we have confirmation. For now, you'll stay under observation. We'll begin preparations to extract the others, but Clara wasn't listening anymore. The memory came rushing back. The smoothie, Daniel's eyes, the faint dizziness that night in Bangkok. She had dismissed it all, the strange way he talked about insects, his knowledge, his timing. This wasn't random. She had been targeted. Later that night, Clara couldn't sleep. Her fever had stabilized, but the restlessness had returned. Every part of her body felt foreign now, untrustworthy. She laid in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow beep of the monitor beside her. The shadows seemed longer. The room too quiet. She turned to look at the specimen jar on the far counter. The larva floated in a clear solution, pale and lifeless now but still grotesque. And inside it, hidden to the naked eye, was the thing no one could explain. A machine. The second larva hadn't broken through yet, but it would. She could feel it, coiling somewhere deeper, waiting, and then a new sensation. Not just motion, heat, radiating from within. Not from her body, but from something else, like a current surging beneath her skin, brief but distinct. Her muscles tightened, her breath hitched. It was almost like the thing inside her had reacted. To what? To the scan, to the light, or to the knowledge that it had been found? Clara's hand moved slowly over the blanket and pressed gently to the spot above her knee, where the second shape had shown up on the image. There was no visible change, but deep inside something responded. A twitch. Then stillness. She pulled her hand away, her fingers trembling. Whatever had been done to her, it wasn't over. It had only just begun. Clara barely recognized the room she was in. It had changed overnight, not in its walls or furnishings, but in the energy that filled it. A security guard had been posted discreetly outside her door. Her vitals were monitored more frequently now, and the staff who entered wore subtle expressions of tight-lipped curiosity. The whispers in the hallway no longer faded when she turned her head. Something had shifted, and Clara could feel it like a second pulse under her skin. She wasn't just a patient anymore. She was evidence. The CDC arrived that morning. 2 men in suits, not lab coats, entered the room with calm, controlled movements. They introduced themselves with titles but no warmth. One of them, Agent Collins, carried a slim black briefcase. The other, Dr. Hill, moved like a scientist, eyes scanning Clara with professional detachment before turning to Dr. Reyes with quiet urgency. Clara watched the exchange from her bed. No one had spoken to her directly yet, but she already knew the rules had changed. This was no longer about infection. This was containment. She was told they'd be taking samples, blood, tissue, and another scan. She agreed not because she trusted them, but because she needed to know, needed confirmation of what she feared, that the thing inside her wasn't just alive. It was designed. By noon, she was wheeled down the hall for imaging, flanked by two nurses and a silent tech who avoided her gaze. The hallway seemed longer today, dimmer, as if the light itself had retreated from her presence. The second scan showed more than expected. The two additional larvae were now clearly visible, both larger than before. One had migrated slightly, deeper toward her thigh, embedded in muscle. The other had shifted downward, closer to the back of her knee. Both pulsed faintly, both were alive. But it was what surrounded them that made the room fall quiet. The tissues near the larvae showed unusual patterns, high-density clusters with metallic traces. The tech paused the screen, zoomed in. The signature was familiar now, identical to the structure found in the first, another micro-device. Dr. Reyes stood behind the tech, arms folded tightly, her jaw clenched. "That's not from nature," she said under her breath. Agent Collins, who had followed them into the room, didn't comment. He simply stared at the screen, his face unreadable. Clara's heart pounded in her ears. She looked at the glowing masses on the monitor, at the intricate patterns of her own flesh wrapped around something that should never have been there. "Why me?" she whispered. No one answered. Back in her hospital room, Clara stared out the window. Snow had begun to fall, dusting the trees in the distance with a softness that felt cruel against the storm inside her. She tried to recall every moment of her trip, every person she'd encountered, but it always came back to one. Daniel. He had found her in Bangkok, not the other way around. He had known about botflies, talked about insects with unsettling detail. He had insisted on the smoothie. She had been chosen. That night, Dr. Reyes returned alone. "I need to show you something," she said quietly. Clara sat up in bed. "We ran the serial code on the microdevice extracted from the first larva. It wasn't just some homemade transmitter. It has a military registration prefix, a partial match to a decommissioned research project from 8 years ago." Clara's mouth went dry. "The project's name was Matrice," Reyes continued. "It stood for Modular Autonomous Tracking and Response Insect Systems, originally proposed for battlefield surveillance, using insects or parasitic hosts to track, monitor, and, in some cases, influence behavior." Clara stared at her. "Are you saying I was used?" Dr. Reyes exhaled slowly. "I'm saying that something once shelved as theoretical is now very real. And it was put inside you." The air between them thickened, filled with all the things that couldn't be said. There was no apology, no reassurance, only truth. And that was worse. The next 24 hours unfolded like a waking dream. Clara remained under observation, but her role had quietly changed. Doctors no longer spoke about her infection with passive concern. They whispered about protocols, containment, chain of custody. Her body was no longer just a patient's. It was a data point, a case study, a breach of something bigger. She overheard fragments of conversations outside her door. Words like biotech, unauthorized trial, classified. The more she heard, the less real everything became. Her hospital room, sterile, quiet, humming with soft machines, was now the center of something she didn't understand but could feel closing in around her. And still, the other larvae moved. Not constantly, not dramatically, but enough. Clara could feel them when she lay still too long, a slow press, a gentle realignment, a twitch like muscle memory that wasn't hers. Dr. Reyes tried to remain present, tried to protect what little humanity the process allowed, but even she seemed increasingly strained. She spent long hours in labs now, leaving Clara in the care of rotating specialists. Some looked at Clara like she was a person, others like she was a puzzle. Clara stopped asking questions. The answers never came fast enough, so she began looking for her own. She convinced the night nurse, young, awkward, nervous, to leave the tablet monitor unlocked at her bedside, said she liked to track her vitals, to feel in control. It wasn't a lie, not entirely, but when the nurse left the room, Clara opened the browser. She searched for Project Matrice. Nothing. She searched for insect surveillance DARPA, and this time links surfaced: academic papers, declassified memos, conspiracy forums. Most of them felt exaggerated, speculative. But the core ideas kept repeating. Biological systems adapted as delivery vehicles, remote tracking through microtech embedded in parasites, behavioral modulation through protein channel stimulation in host organisms. It sounded like science fiction, but she was living it. And then she found it, an old paper, archived on an academic server, co-authored by someone named Daniel R. Wilkes. The topic? Behavioral pathways and host manipulation via parasitic larval implantation. She stared at the name Daniel, the Daniel who gave her the smoothie. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled. The paper described experiments conducted on rodents and primates using parasitic organisms modified to deliver neurochemical agents. Proof of concept was the phrase repeated throughout. No mention of human testing, not officially. But Clara understood now. Daniel hadn't just been a charming tourist. He was part of it, maybe even one of its architects. And she had been a trial. The realization didn't hit like a scream. It settled like a weight. A quiet, dense gravity that pulled her shoulders inward. Her body had been claimed, repurposed without her knowledge, not just by the larva, but by the minds that had bred it. She closed the tablet and stared out the window. Snow was falling again, drifting softly past the glass. Later that evening, Dr. Reyes returned. Her face was pale, tired. "We've scheduled the extraction procedure for tomorrow morning," she said. "We want to remove both remaining larvae while they're still accessible." Clara nodded slowly. "I found him," she said. Dr. Reyes paused. "Who?" "The man in Bangkok, Daniel. He co-wrote a paper on parasitic host manipulation years ago. It's still online." Reyes didn't respond, but her expression changed, not surprise, confirmation. "You already knew," Clara whispered. Reyes sat down slowly. "We suspected, but we weren't authorized to say. Not until the investigation clears jurisdictional review." Clara shook her head. "No more silence," she said. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried weight now. "No more waiting. I want to know everything. I want to speak to whoever's in charge. If my body was used for an experiment, if I was turned into something, then I want the truth. I deserve the truth." Reyes looked at her for a long moment, and then she nodded. "I'll make the call." That night, Clara didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling again, but not in fear, not in pain. In clarity, she was no longer just surviving. She was preparing. The room they brought her to was not part of the hospital. It was down a corridor she hadn't walked before, through a secure door guarded by a silent man in a navy suit, and into a space that felt like it had been built not for healing, but for control. The air was colder here, the windows were tinted, and the table at the center of the room was too clean. Clara sat in a straight-back chair, wrapped in a hospital robe, a blanket over her shoulders. Her legs felt heavy. Her skin, even now, pulsed faintly with the presence of the remaining larvae. But it wasn't the physical discomfort that hollowed her out. It was the waiting. Agent Collins entered first. His expression hadn't changed since the first time she met him. Neutral, composed, without kindness or cruelty. He offered a brief nod, then took a seat across from her. A woman followed, dressed in military uniform. Her name tag read Lieutenant Colonel R. Brenner. She looked older than Clara, but not by much, her gaze sharp and unapologetic. They didn't ask how Clara was feeling. They didn't offer pleasantries. "We're here to brief you," Brenner said, setting a tablet on the table, "and to hear your account. Your cooperation is appreciated and expected." Clara said nothing. Collins tapped the screen. Project Matrix began as a Department of Defense initiative in 2014. The objective was battlefield reconnaissance using biologically integrated systems, specifically insects modified to deliver microdata payloads inside hostile territory. Initial tests were conducted in controlled environments. Funding ceased in 2017. Clara's voice cracked from disuse. "Then why was it inside me?" "Because someone continued it," Brenner said. "Illegally, outside the oversight of any approved agency." Clara leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Daniel Wilkes." Brenner didn't blink. Dr. Wilkes was one of the early contributors to Matrix. After the project was shut down, he left government research, disappeared from public record. "We believe he's been working with private biotech ventures overseas, possibly developing unauthorized variations of the original concept." "And you let him?" Clara said, her voice rising for the first time. "You let him take people like me, innocent travelers, and turn us into delivery systems?" Collins shifted. "We didn't authorize this, but you created it," Clara snapped. "You made the blueprint. You trained the people. You planted the seed." A silence followed, one that felt like a confirmation. "Brenner broke it. We recovered Wilkes in Bangkok 2 days ago." Clara froze. "He's in custody," Brenner continued. "He's agreed to speak with you." "What?" Collins nodded. "He requested it. Says he owes you an explanation." Clara's breath hitched. Her instinct screamed, no, don't give him space, don't give him voice. But another part of her burned for it, for answers, for confrontation. She gave the smallest nod. The room changed again a few minutes later. Brenner and Collins stepped aside, the door opened, and there he was, Daniel. He looked different, his hair unkempt, eyes darker, thinner in the face. But it was him. That same presence, that same quiet intensity that once made her drop her guard. The man who handed her a smoothie like it was kindness. The man who turned her body into a lab. He sat across from her. Didn't speak at first. Then, "You weren't supposed to carry it that long." Clara blinked. "Excuse me?" Daniel's voice was calm, controlled. "You were part of a short-term trial. Passive host, 48 hours max. Extraction arranged upon re-entry. Her fists clenched beneath the blanket. Extraction arranged by whom? Silence. She already knew. "You infected me without my consent," she said slowly. "You turned me into an object. A carrier." Daniel nodded once. "That's true. No excuses, no apologies, just a fact. But you weren't just chosen randomly, Clara," he said. That stopped her. "What?" "You passed all the pre-screens, psychological resilience, immune markers, social stability. Single parenthood wasn't a deterrent, it was a factor. You were strong, predictable. You don't panic, you endure." Clara's mouth opened but no words came. "You weren't a risk," he said. "You were ideal." The silence after his words was unbearable. It hung in the air like static, heavy and charged, vibrating just beneath the surface of Clara's skin. Ideal. That was what she had been to him. Not a woman, not a mother, not a person with memories and grief and love, but a profile, a category, a calculation. Clara felt her throat tighten, her hands curling into fists under the thin hospital blanket. She wanted to scream, to reach across the table, to strike him, but she didn't. Instead, she sat very still. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady. "You watched me, you studied me, you found a way in. And you smiled while you did it." Daniel didn't look away. It was never personal. Clara leaned forward. "That's the problem, isn't it? None of this is personal to you. Not the pain, not the fear, not the nights I laid awake thinking something was eating me from the inside out. Not the way my son looked at me like I was breaking. That was never part of the data." Daniel's jaw tensed just slightly. "The project was bigger than—" "No," Clara cut him off, her voice rising now. "Don't you dare say it was bigger than me. You put something in my body without my knowledge. You turned me into a carrier. You hijacked my autonomy. There's no mission, no government, no scientific breakthrough that makes that acceptable." For a brief moment, Daniel looked smaller. Not regretful, but human. A flicker, a fracture in the mask. "I didn't think it would stay in that long," he said again, quieter. "You were supposed to be scanned on re-entry. Picked up, monitored. They lost track of you in Hawaii." Clara laughed bitterly. "So it was a logistical error, a clerical mistake. That's your defense?" Daniel looked at her now, really looked, eyes meeting hers with something close to recognition. "You weren't supposed to suffer." "But I did," Clara said. "I still am." She reached down, touched the bandage on her leg where the first larva had been removed. Beneath the skin, she could still feel the other two, waiting, growing. "I live every minute knowing I was violated by something I didn't consent to, not just by a parasite, but by you." He didn't respond. Clara stood slowly, ignoring the discomfort in her leg, letting her words rise like a tide she refused to hold back. "You saw my strength and used it against me. You thought because I endure, because I carry the weight of my children and my work and my life in silence, that I wouldn't break, that I'd be the perfect host. And maybe you were right." She took a step forward. "But you didn't think I'd fight back." Daniel's eyes followed her. There was no arrogance in them now, no control, only something colder, realization, the beginning of understanding what he had created, what he had awakened. Clara turned to the officials in the room. "I want to testify. I want every word recorded. I want to speak at whatever hearing or trial or tribunal comes next. You're going to let me be more than a file in your system. I will be heard." Brenner nodded once, but her eyes flicked to Daniel as if seeing him in a new light. Agent Collins looked down, scribbling into his notepad. Clara stepped back, her voice quieter now, but no less sharp. "You said I was ideal," she told Daniel. "Maybe you were right. But not for what you thought. I'm not just a host, I'm a witness. And I'm not going away. She left the room with her head held high, the sting in her leg flaring with each step. But it was no longer just pain, it was purpose. Recovery did not come easily. The extraction of the remaining larvae took place 2 days after her confrontation with Daniel. It was a longer, more invasive procedure than the first. The deeper larva had embedded itself into muscle, requiring delicate maneuvering and small incisions. Clara was awake through most of it, numbed, yes, but not unaware. She could feel the pressure, the tugging, the quiet, sterile panic behind the doctor's eyes, when the sensors embedded in the larval tissue proved more complex than expected. They removed them both, carefully. Completely, the micro-devices were extracted intact, sealed in biohazard containers, and carried away by men in black gloves and unreadable expressions. Clara never saw them again. She didn't ask to, but the aftermath lingered. Her leg was stiff, bandaged from thigh to knee. She needed assistance to walk at first, then a cane. The physical pain ebbed slowly, replaced by a more familiar, quieter ache, the kind born not from injury but from the slow erosion of trust. Trust in her body, in the system, in the world. At night her sleep came fractured, shallow. She dreamed of motion beneath her skin, of voices in sterile rooms, of Daniel's eyes staring through her as if she were a window instead of a person. The hospital moved her to a more private unit after the press got wind of her case. A leak. Someone said too much. The headlines spread fast. American woman used as unwitting host in illegal biological trial. Parasite scandal raises questions about military experiments. Who watches the watchers? Clara turned off the TV. She stopped reading the news. Instead, she focused on healing. One slow, painful inch at a time, physical therapy sessions that left her drenched in sweat, breathing exercises to keep the nightmares from crawling back into her chest, short walks around the hospital courtyard where the trees were beginning to bloom. Spring had arrived. She tried to see beauty in that. Mrs. Halverson brought the children for short visits. Sue clung to her hand, eyes wide with questions she was too afraid to ask. Howard was quieter, older somehow, like the weeks apart had aged him in ways Clara couldn't measure. But their presence stitched her back together, bit by bit. She showed them her cane like it was a trophy, not a wound, told them the truth, not the details, but enough. That she had gotten sick, that something had happened during her trip, that she was better now. They accepted it. Because they trusted her. Because she was still mom. Dr. Reyes continued to check in. Her face had softened since the early days, less clinical, more human. She brought updates, legal proceedings, ongoing investigations, inquiries from global health agencies. Clara listened, but rarely responded. Information felt like a distant echo now, like something happening to someone else, until the day they asked her to speak. A congressional subcommittee on experimental biotechnologies had requested her testimony. Voluntary, confidential, but public if she wanted. Clara didn't answer right away. She sat with the invitation for days, letting the weight of it settle. She was tired, still healing, still piecing herself back together. But then she remembered the look on Daniel's face, that quiet certainty that she would endure, stay silent, fade away. She remembered the technician who flinched when the scan flickered, the nurse who never met her eyes, the silence, and she made a decision. The hearing room in Washington, D.C. was cold, not physically, though the air conditioning hummed with government precision, but emotionally. Everything was neutral. Cream-colored walls, thin carpeting, a long wooden table, rows of quiet staffers with laptops and clipboards. Cameras were permitted but not active yet. It wasn't meant to be theater. But Clara understood something that the men and women in suits didn't. Truth is always dramatic when you're finally allowed to say it out loud. She sat in the witness chair, her hands resting gently on the table. A small microphone waited in front of her. She wore a dark dress, simple, strong. Her cane leaned against the leg of the table, visible, deliberately. A woman at the center of the panel adjusted her glasses. "Miss Hastings, we appreciate your willingness to appear. You may begin your statement whenever you're ready." Clara looked up, looked at them, and then she began. "My name is Clara Hastings. I'm a mother of 2. I live in Massachusetts. I work at a medical clinic. I've paid my taxes. I've followed the rules. I've trusted the system." Her voice was clear, steady. And that system used my body without my knowledge, without my consent. It turned me into a carrier for experimental technology that I didn't ask for. It infected me, tracked me, treated me as a data point instead of a human being. A few people shifted in their seats. Clara went on, I was targeted while traveling abroad, not by criminals in the traditional sense, but by people in lab coats, people with funding and credentials and institutional protection. People who saw my strength as a vulnerability, who thought because I was quiet, because I was stable, because I was a mother, that I wouldn't fight back. She paused, and for a while I didn't. The room was still. I doubted myself. I assumed I was overreacting. I swallowed the fear, the sickness, the knowledge that something was growing inside me against my will, and when I finally spoke up, I was studied, contained, measured. She leaned slightly toward the microphone, and then I saw what they had put in me, not just a living parasite, but a device, a machine, built by human hands, embedded inside a living thing, and that thing was embedded in me. Clara inhaled slowly. I will never get that time back, the nights I spent afraid. The look in my children's eyes when they knew I wasn't okay. The way I still feel my skin crawl when it's too quiet. I survived something that should never have happened. A silence followed, not awkward, reverent. And then, I didn't come here for sympathy, she said. I came here so this doesn't happen again. Not to another woman, not to another traveler, not to anyone who doesn't have the power to speak for themselves. I came here to remind you that the moment science forgets humanity, it becomes something else. She looked around the room, held their gaze. I was a host. Now I'm a witness, and you don't get to forget me. When she stood to leave, no one spoke for a long moment. Later, outside the building, the air was warmer than she expected. Soft wind threaded through her hair. Reporters had gathered beyond the barricades, kept at a distance. Clara didn't go to them. She wasn't there for spectacle. But she stood for a moment on the steps, her cane steady beneath her hand, and looked out across the crowd. Among them were faces she would never know, survivors, skeptics, mothers, students, people who had read her story and seen themselves reflected in it, people who believed her. She nodded once. Just enough. Then she turned and walked down the steps one at a time. Slow, deliberate, whole, her body was hers again. Her voice was louder than ever. And her silence, finally, was over. Clara's story is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, when your body is no longer your own, when silence is forced upon you, there is still a way back, a way to reclaim your voice, a way to rise. She wasn't just a victim, she became a witness, a fighter. And through her courage, she helped protect others from suffering the same fate. If this story moved you, made you think, or simply made you feel something real, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because the next story we tell might be the one that changes how you see the world. Thank you for listening.